So what we're going to do as a workshop process today is I'll give you an update of setting some context around it, but also share with you what came out of some of the workshops to date. So you can see the themes that are emerging from these 10 workshops that we've held so far. The second thing, we'll go into look into the design pillars that were in the discussion paper that was circulated. If you haven't read the discussion paper, it doesn't matter, we'll cover it in the context. Then we're going to have a discussion around the governance of the strategy and the industry itself, and it's fantastic to have you here, Osman, because I've been quite keen to get your views on it. And then finally, there will be a bit on communication around Phoenix and the strategy going forward. We've got enough people to do breakout groups, so we will, because that all gives you a chance to have a conversation, and that's more. So we'll do a couple of breakout groups as we go along. There's also a couple of polls. For those of you who've been in the workshop before, some of the polls have changed, so that's a bit of a bonus, so we don't have to repeat things, but we are repeating a few because we just need that for consistency. We've had about 100 people come to all of the workshops so far, so the turnout's been fantastic. And some people have been more to one, including one person who came to 7. Anyway, we'll share my screen and just go through some introductory slides. So this will take about 10 minutes, I think. So firstly, as I said, we're up to, we've got 4 workshops to go, 1 tomorrow and then 3 in the middle of May. Just for the record, this meeting is being recorded, all the workshops have been recorded, and they will be available on the GA website towards the end of this week. And if you want to watch it again, or you want to see what happened in some of the other workshops, please feel free to follow those links when they're sent out. But today is about your say on the strategy, about the purpose, the opportunities and challenges, and talking about how the strategy can be governed into the future. So I'll give you an overview of the findings. We'll go through the pillars. We've drawn out quality specifically on its own because it's a binding glue element, governance and the comms. So what have we heard so far through the workshops? And particularly the theme workshops, because that's where we drilled into a lot of detail. Basically, we've structured the strategy as what's called a challenge or a mission-based approach. And at the top of the strategy, there are these 2 challenges. The first challenge is that we continue to make the full diversity of Australian native plant species and their genetics available for posterity. So that's an insurance dimension and active use. In other words, we get it into the ground and also use it for research and other purposes. The second challenge was that the sector matures to a level where it attracts the resources to sustain its skills and capacity and to respond where required. We did polling on this for about the first half a dozen workshops, and the polling came in very strongly around the challenge. So that will do for the framing of it. What we now need is some more specific objectives, and that will be included in the draft strategy. When we looked at the 5 design pillars, as they're called in the discussion paper, here's the 15 key points that came out of the workshops that we held with a whole bunch of people. So in terms of research, and they're simply listed in the order in which the workshops happen, there's plenty of research capability in Australia, but coordination falls away markedly. There's some strong national networks, and in some regions in Australia, there are very strong networks in coordination. But as a whole, coordination seems to be a big challenge. There's also a lot of really good stuff that's already been researched and things are known. So there's a general feeling that it's time to consolidate and put more of that to use. And when we look to the future, we need to identify some themes that really set the research agenda and provide some guidance for the next decade, because the strategy has a 10-year time frame, and make sure that that's connected to the users as the process. So that fell out reasonably clearly. Then when we went and looked at the conservation sector, and I'll go into this more detail in 2 slides' time, this is the part of the sector where the demand signal is the most variable and inconsistent. So as a consequence, it's the hardest part of the native seed sector for enterprises to remain viable. And it doesn't matter whether it's commercial, not-for-profit or government. It's quite capability constrained in many areas. There's a lot of active seeking of partners, But with partners comes pluses and minuses, so pros and cons. And sometimes, so this is a part of the sector where there's a lot of frustration and also a lot of change going on. Capacity building is a strong theme. Making it affordable, the need to link it to accreditation, and also what came out in capacity building was as much about educating the buyer as much as working on the supply side where capacity needs to be developed. There was about accessibility to networks, to brokerages and exchanges. There is a real need for an ongoing networking function. There are some quite distinct different groups who have slightly different needs and views, but that can be all integrated. And lastly, that if we're going to grow the sector, it does need ongoing promotion and some key messaging around it, so people are reminded it's there to highlight its importance across all of the various things it does. As a system, what has really emerged is that in many cases, or in most cases, the sector is supply side constrained rather than demand constrained. There is a shortage of collectors in many places, and there are some issues with accessing sites, both on public and private lands, and they seem to constrain a lot of supply. Across the various subsectors, coordination of inventories, so these are the physical stores of seeds, as well as having good systems that link the value chain together, seem to be quite challenging. And fit for purpose specifications and code of practice appear to be needed. On the demand side, and I'll come to this later, it's definitely growing, but it's patchy. And a lot of it is driven not by a traditional environmental outcome focus. Getting the specification right, timing is a real constraint. And also what's really interesting is people often report that when you look at the design intent of what goes, when seed is planned to be used and then the results in the ground, is they say that, there's a feeling it could go better. Part of that's related to the quality of the seed, and part of it is to the quality of the process that puts it into the ground and the way it's looked after, which isn't really in the scope of this strategy, but it is a constraint. And so as a result of the demand, you see standards, information sharing, and a code of practice emerging as themes out of that discussion. In the discussion across all the workshops around quality, by and large, there's enough information for a standard at the moment, but it's time to put it into practice. It's time to lead with the code of practice and labelling. It does need promotion and education, a quality system, and it needs to be active in, we can see it's successful, and we need to be promoted into being active in the trading, regulation and training around native seeds. When we talked about governance, there is a recognition that an industry body should emerge in time, and the strategy will have an objective saying there should be one. How that emerges, we'll discuss as part of this workshop, and there are a range of different ways that could happen. The strategy itself does need an owner. It will inevitably involve a committee, so it'll be some form of public-private partnership, but who the sponsor or the owner of the strategy itself is as a single organisation is unclear at this stage, and there's a range of different options that are there. There will need to be a knowledge forum. It'll probably be a distributed network because of the diverse needs, and it needs to be linked to a community of practice and potentially some sort of trading exchange. So in summary, what we've heard out of there is that all of the issues that we've heard and the needs and the challenges and opportunities fit under the design pillars, and they are working, and so we're getting to a level where we're confident we can start drafting the strategy. I might just pause there and just ask if you to say, well, is there anything that you'd like clarified? Is there anything that really catches your mind or that you may like to make a comment on? I'll put the field open to all of you and say, let me know what you think.
I'm interested in the terminology of the word owner. What you're exactly implying by that term in itself, because that can constrain rather than aid and abet the principles of what you're trying to introduce. it becomes controlled, and it quite often becomes a conflict of interest between private and the commercial sector opposed to the government sector. It can actually, quality and standards and all these things are highly necessary, but the way they're implemented can actually become detrimental because they're not actually based upon practice.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that discussion as we go through today. A strategy doesn't need an owner, a quality system doesn't need an owner, but how it's owned.
I don't know. Yeah, I disagree with the term owner. That implies that one person decides what happens and is in control, and it should be more of a combined effort about I'm not really describing myself very well here. It should be more of a community base where there's a number of people who could be perceived to be owners. One isn't a good idea unless it's independent and separate from. The potential for manipulation and things to be used and policies to be, it just gets really complicated. Ownership should be communal, not as in one. Here we go. I'm getting more to the terminology I'm trying to use. So ownership, it's not really ownership, it's a shared, it's a group resource and knowledge, and as a result, no one really owns it because then it's controlled and dictated by one, and it usually gets out of hand. Each sector tries to get funny with it. So if no one actually owns it, if we all own it, it's to everybody's benefit rather than to one individual group or sector's intent.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm implying there, the terminology is really important because things get set the stage for how things are going to be perceived or where they're going to go.
So ownership is a critical issue, and by ownership,
yeah.
We don't imply a single owner or commander control or rights removed as part of it. We're saying this is just something that needs to be thought about and articulated clearly.
Absolutely.
And probably more important than the word owner is what we need is ownership.
Thank you. Yeah, here we go. Now I feel like we're on the same page. There we go. Yeah.
Right. And so this is why we're going through this process about building ownership, because there are lots of tripping hazards around lots of things, and we have to find the shared meaning. So,
absolutely.
Any other thoughts that people have around the points I've raised so far? I can see you, Osman, you've got your hand up.
Yep. So I don't know if people can see this if I hold it up, but this is the Australian seed industry's National Code of Practice for labelling and marketing of seed for sowing. So this is actually a mandatory document for Australian Seed Federation members that sets out all of the information that should be on a seed label. This was written mostly by the grain and pasture seed industry, reflective of our membership. Its ownership is the 110 Australian Seed Federation members, so it's owned collectively. Any changes are agreed at our national conference every year to that code. The timing is really good to have this discussion because I've commenced a root and branch review of the code, because at the moment it doesn't work well for our horticultural members, so our veg seed members. It really it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole for those companies. And we don't have anything on native seeds in there at the moment either. So that's something that's been put on the table by ASF members who sell native seeds, that we really need to cover the native seed sector, particularly if we're looking to grow our membership in that area. So I really see this conversation as an opportunity to feed into, our review of the code so that we can, better address the needs of native seed companies through this document. This document has no power outside of the Australian Seed Federation. It only applies to Australian Seed Federation members. So hope I didn't scare anyone by holding it up, but it's just, it's a document that we use, and we actually audit all of our members' labels biannually to make sure that they're complying with that minimum amount of information on those seed labels. So anyway, that's my contribution.
Great, thank you. Any final comments people would like to make before we go into the next session? I saw you, were you raising your hand, Alice?
No, I was more comment on Carmen, sorry. I think ownership is more like, a body. I have also looked into the Australian Seed Federation previously, from the view of native seed sector, and didn't really find that it would work for me in the current context. So it's good to see that Osman is, looking to review that, because I'll certainly be, keen. And I think an overall body, such as Australian Seed Federation or something that can be completely new, is what is required for this, you know, ownership or governance, where there's a whole, you know, we're all coming from broad different aspects or backgrounds to make this work the best for everybody.
Great. Now, I've just got a bit of feedback saying my sound is patchy. Is that better for everybody?
Presently, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, presently.
I just put my notebook too close to my microphone and I half masked it, so my apologies. Okay, shall we go on to the next agenda item, ladies and gentlemen?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so the design pillars. Now, a couple of things to set some context around the discussion we're about to have. So what we have up here is a stylised representation of the value chain of native seed. So it comes from a range of different sources. It's stored in different ways. There are a range of different suppliers, there are a range of different users, and there are both private and government enablers around the sector. I'm not going to go into any detail on that. I think this next slide highlights the diversity and therefore some of the challenges and the opportunities around it. And it's really fantastic to have Sustainable Timber Tasmania on board around this, because sustainable timber, I was going to say forestry, because we haven't heard a lot about the views from this sector in the workshops yet. So when you break, when you try and say, well, what really is the native seed sector? There are about half a dozen different markets. So the largest two are probably rehabilitation and forestry. So rehabilitation is about site remediation. It occurs in mining, around infrastructure, a whole range of things. And that appears, from a traditional view of native seed, accounts for the largest amount of seed that's used. Forestry, with a large forestry estate in the country, also for wood products primarily, also uses a lot of native seed, but probably within a narrower band than some of the others might use. The conservation sector, we're using it to restore and rehabilitate locations, and there's been a shift from general revegetation to very much focusing on particular areas and threatened species. And what's characteristic here is the large number of public and private organisations as well as individuals that are involved. But volumetrically, it's a lot smaller. In horticulture, there's been a long history of ornamentals around native species. There's obviously native foods, and people are looking for new and novel uses for native seeds and the plants. So there's a real food and green life there. It's often highly promoted. It can be intensely valuable and profitable, but it's also volumetrically smaller. Indigenous is really coming along very strongly in recent years, and a lot of it's not just related around to conservation and commerce, but it's also related to cultural matters. And we see Indigenous organisations active in this space, as well as through a whole series of partnerships. And then the one that is growing is essentially, and has grown quite markedly over the last decade, is offsetting. Most states now run an offsetting scheme associated for biodiversity, and there are now targets around various parts of Australia, as well as increasing interest in carbon sequestration. So we're beginning to see a lot of land managers become involved in that, and there are also brokerages starting to emerge around that as part of it. So when we look at the fact that we have about half a dozen subsectors that make up the industry, all of them have slightly different characteristics and drivers. What we want to have a discussion now is about which one of these pillars, from where you sit in Australia, so your state or your organisation, do you believe is going to unlock the greatest potential and add the greatest amount of value to the sector? Is it around providing information on demand and supply? So where can I get seed from and who wants it? Is it about quality and standards? So we're confident that the seed will work, and we know, and it meets essentially, if it's provenance requirements, viability tests, etc. Is it about smarter regulation to improve access to seed, but also avoiding overexploitation of seed sources? Or is it about allowing it to be more used in more contexts because sometimes restraints are put on the use of seeds? Is it about developing skills and infrastructure, or is it about promoting the industry more generally? And finally, is it about fundamental and applied research, or just simply getting it out there? These pillars are all in the chat line, but what I'd like us to do now is to break into our groups and have a discussion around these two questions. Which pillars have the greatest potential to develop the sector from where you sit in native seeds? And who are the key industry and government community leaders in this in the part of the industry that you're in? So we have some people here from the state's perspective, some are working in various subsectors. I'm just very keen to see who you see the leaders are and which pillars you believe will drive the industry forward best. I'll just pause there. And is everybody comfortable with the questions? They're in, and shall we go and have our small group discussions? And I'll see you all again in about 10 or 15 minutes. Welcome back, everybody, and sorry if I cut you off in mid-flight like you were, Alice. Look, an important part of this workshop is capturing all of the views. So could you please take a minute or so and just jot down in the chat line what your reflection from the discussion was, and then we'll do a poll on the pillars, and then we'll go on to the next agenda item, which will be to talk about constraints. But just something you thought was important, something you learnt, just pass on a reflection in the chat line. And so we've got a comment in from Osman who's saying that all pillars are important, and the group he was in spent a lot of time talking about quality and standards. Alice says 1 and 2. So information and quality. And then Rowena says, yep, she's on with Osman, but securing the seed and education is also very important. How are you going with it, Carmen? Are you getting on top of the technology?
I am. I'm just considering my response. It's quite long-winded. I thought I'd try to make it shorter. Sorry. I think that I'll just say it. Frankly, it's easier for me. I type slowly. I agree with all of the above. There's heaps more to consider, and we're just starting.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Well, why don't we do a poll on this? So, James, can you put up the poll, please? So, information and quality came out as number 1, and capacity as number 2. So that certainly that was where the discussion focused in the group that I was in. All right, let me just introduce the next question, and won't take long, and then we'll go back to our breakout rooms, do that for another 10 minutes, and then we'll move on. So the breakout discussion here is just simply, what we're interested in here is understanding the constraints that are upon you as in your organisation. So, and there can be other ones here, but we've just listed some that have been identified through the workshops. So is it about clear demand signals or even clear policy signals? Is it about maintaining motivation? That's been a big issue for some people. Is it about access to skilled staff and volunteers? Is it about lack of equipment? Is it a lack of knowledge and systems, and is it about partners and networks, or is it simply about accessing a supply of native seed? So Alexandra will put these constraints in the chat box so you can refer to them, and we'll go back to our breakout rooms, but we'll spend a little bit less time on it this time. So see how we go, but I would say about 5 to 10 minutes. So James, can you send us back to our rooms, and I'll see you all in about 10. Welcome back, everybody. And I was in mid-comment there. So yeah, this coming back from the rooms is a bit of a brutal process, but so be it. So again, we'll pick up that point later on. It's in the agenda, Osman. But again, just share your reflections down in the chat line, and Carmen, please just express yours verbally. Don't torture yourself with the chat line. Osman put up funding cycles and accessing and identifying suppliers. Thank you, Osman. Does somebody else want to share? Access and approval in a timely manner. 12 months, 6 to 12 months lead time or beyond is required. And Rowena says, I don't think people know there is an industry around seed harvesting, and we need to educate about this fascinating industry.
Touche.
And money really does grow on trees, according to Rowena. So thank you. That's a great one-liner.
It absolutely does. Nobody understands the assets that they own.
And partnerships and Peter Harrison. So thanks. What did you have, Peter Moore? You've got a different perspective. I'm quite keen to hear it.
Mm.
Yeah, look, I never got an opportunity to talk before, but in our case, because of who we are, I guess, we're land managers, and we have access to vast areas of land around Tassie. And so accessing seed isn't an issue. We focus on regeneration of harvested areas mainly, but in supplying Greening Australia and NRM North, some with seed, mostly with seedlings we raise in our nursery. And so we don't really have a lot of restraint because we're very specific in what we can provide, and our clients are aware of that. And so obviously we don't do grasses, we don't do understory species. It's just mainly trees and shrubs of a common nature, but we can be very specific in area and zone close to where the requirements are, because we have such a resource in bank. We don't have to worry about a poor year, for instance. Some of the comments from the others were, you go there, the seed is gone, those sorts of things. Well, luckily, some cases we've got sufficient stock, but viability is an issue, obviously, when you're storing for long periods of time. But yeah, we probably don't have the restraints of some of the smaller suppliers in the industry. Yeah.
And do other forestry, like Forestry New South Wales and others, do they supply to the conservation sector or the restoration sector?
Yeah, look, I'm not certain. Mainly, they look after their own requirements, as what I understand. For their regeneration, stream side, re-veg type works on their own land. So other species that they require for that, I'm not sure how they obtain those.
Because I think if you think through some of the discussions we've been having today, and particularly the difference between the ACT and Tasmania. So Tasmania is a comparatively small state in terms of, so it seems to me that you're all working there's quite a strong relationship between the public and the private and the various uses for native seed, and you've worked out an approach. While we've heard from Richard as part of the thing where they're trying to do some re-veg after the fires and things like that, and they're wanting to do climate adjusted provenance and those things, and all of a sudden the system, I think, would it be a fair summary, Richard, to say that as you've gone into this latest activity, that you haven't really got an underlying system that could scale up particularly easily for you?
No, that's totally right. And the other issue is that we don't have the policy in place to back up decisions around, I can't remember who was suggesting, maybe it was Peter, about, substituting species out that, might not even occur in the ACT, but, with future sort of climate change predictions that are quite likely to occur here in the future. So bringing them in, which would, be considered weed species in many respects, is there's no policy to back up those sorts of decisions either. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, it's time for a vote, and we've got to get through the agenda so we can continue. Some good themes coming out of here, but very keen to see from your perspective, so for your organisation, where your constraints lie. Again, pick your top three. So, the top one was partners and networks. Access to native seed supply and access to labour were number two, and then the clear policy signals and demand were they came in at number three together around that. So thank you. What we're finding is that there's quite a lot of variance around this through the workshops, and we're finding there's quite a lot of variance between different parts of the sector. So we'll analyse all of that towards the end and see whether there's some patterns that are emerging. It's time to move on to quality, but we'll see how we go with this. We might get through it quickly because certainly the group I was in earlier had a good discussion around quality. So if we get through it a bit earlier, that's good. But I'm just sharing my slide now. So as I said, the quality out of all of the pillars are the ones that we identified as probably being the glue pillar as such. And the reason why is for what's called the lemon problem or the second-hand car problem. So it's really important to underpin the growth of a sector is you know what's being traded, you know what's being sold, you know what's being bought. And so quality underpins the growth of any industry, and standards are integral to that. Coming back to Carmen's opening comments, that standards that have ownership across the sector around it, and they need to be used. So what we find is that quality systems need to be evolve rather than necessarily, brought in by regulation right up front. And examples of quality are a mark, so some labelling, or a code of practice. The drivers behind it are essentially about, the viability of the seed, the right seed from the right source. The barriers around it are cost, if there are many standards, which standard to use, and of course, if the standards and the quality systems aren't used, then they're not adding value to the sector, and they could actually become a drag in their own right. So to just drive our discussion going forward, and I think we'll do this one as a plenary session rather than going back to our breakout groups. And this is a question that questions I've asked in all the groups is, do you support the development of a native code of practice, a national code of practice for the native seed and plant sector? Do you support a code of practice forming the basis for labelling the quality of native seed supplied to users? Do you support a code of practice as an alternative to current licensing and regulation? Do you think it should be voluntary or some form of compliance? And that could be compliance through regulation or compliance through contract. And do you think a code of practice could create more red tape for a small business? I've just, Alexander's going to put these into the chat line so you can refer to them. But let's start with the first question. Do we think we need a code of practice?
Absolutely.
Yes. I pretty much agree with every single item on that. I think that if somebody doesn't want to be part of a code of practice, then they might be dodgy.
I totally agree that we need
read it out.
I think we do need a code of practice, but I guess in terms of that first question, the development of one, there's a few floating around. I haven't seen ASF if they've got one, unfortunately, sorry. But I know there is work currently with the Flora Bank, which Lucy Commander previously mentioned in an earlier workshop. So in terms of development, I wouldn't be reinventing the wheel if there's ones out there currently in train, but certainly I think the sector needs to have some sort of code to ensure the quality.
So Peter Moore, what code of practice do you use in forestry? So presumably you've got your own.
Yeah, look, we abide by the standard for sure, and if we on-sell seed to other companies or other parties overseas, wherever, we provide all the necessary bits and pieces like species, the germination, and it's all current. We give that information out current, and we run to a standard developed by CSIRO many years ago for testing and that sort of thing. But with forestry seed, it's mainly the seed that we have is we have our own seed orchards that we produce our seed for our internal use, but we do on-sell the lower quality seed into the industry. But we're up front. We have breeding, we have rankings, we have all sorts of things that we provide to the customer. So we don't. I guess our industry isn't And in the forestry, it's up to the grower to source the best material for the use in their plantations, etc. And we ensure we've got the best material because one, we have our own seed orchards, and so we have our own breeding programs, things like that.
Great, thank you, Peter. So Tamika, at a local government level, do you get involved with the code of practices, or is that a little bit far removed from it? It's not a leading question, it's just that we've heard different views from people who commission a lot of native seed plantings.
Yeah, no, we're pretty removed from that. So I haven't had a lot of involvement there. So
this is really just to share. Can you tell us about how you go about the work that council does? How does a native seed or a native revegetation project work? How do you commission it? This is just sort of explaining the process to everybody so we all know.
Yeah, so I guess for us, we've got our strategies in place at council and what we'd like to achieve. And we're quite fortunate to have quite a bit of open space in our council area. We've got quite a few biodiversity corridors as well. We've got 2 river corridors running through. We've got an escarpment corridor, a coastal corridor. So we're very fortunate there. So that we're really looking at our biodiversity corridors and enhancing what we already have. So then we have our 2 seed production areas, as I've mentioned, where we can secure seed for our own requirements, and that saves us going out, having that one place where we can source all our own seed, not having to go out into the field and deplete seed sources there. So then we've also got budgets. We submit budget bids every year as well at the start of the year for the coming financial year. That's how we go about, I guess, funding that.
And do you contract it out, or do you do it yourself in terms of the actual works?
It's been a bit of both over the years. So our first seed production area was established 12 years ago, and the second one 10 years ago. So we've done that. We've managed it in-house for a period of time. Through, I was mentioning in the breakout session, we have had a bit of staff turnover over the years, and finding the right people to do this task has been quite difficult. So now we contract the maintenance and the harvesting out to contractors.
Okay. And so we've also got Matt Appleby here from Bush Heritage. So how do you approach it, Matt?
Sorry, I just had to duck out. Approach what? Sorry.
Oh.
Caught out.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to, we've got Bush Heritage and we've got a council here. So I just asked Tamika to explain about how it goes about a native seed project. And so we're just trying to draw out the different ways that, what we're calling users in these slides approach, and therefore how whether the code of practice is really a part of your life, or whether it's something that others deal with, and when you're managing it, you're not that deep involved in it.
Yeah, look, I think a code of practice would certainly help us be more reassured that the sort of seed sources that we're endeavouring to get to do the projects on ground would be very useful, just to have that sort of the quality control side of things. If somebody's is following the code, we can relax a little. When we went and did say our project with in Victoria, Nadu Hills, we're getting quite a wide range of different suppliers we had to contact over that. Everyone from people with reputations we knew, right through to people who were basically doing us a favour through field naturalist clubs and things like that. So who would of course not know anything about a code of practice or be abiding by one, because they're not a professional in that capacity. But if we could at least provide that information of this is what would be required if you were, this is what the code of practice is, this is how you should collect it, that would be a very useful thing for us, for sure. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry.
No, that's so do people believe a code of practice should be voluntary or mandatory?
Tough question.
As an end user, we'd probably make it a requirement that we would go to people who use or apply a code. I suppose that's my way of answering it.
So they're a preferred supplier is what I think.
Yeah.
I would think that that would be fair. That obviously it's native seed's quite a costly thing. You're going to, those sort of things would hope, you would assume, guarantee quality and give you some assurance. So you'd think that it would be most advantageous, but I don't know that you necessarily should enforce it. Like say that it should be mandatory. That's instantly going to differentiate the players straight out. Hopefully would be the goal, wouldn't it? You know what I mean? Like having that code of practice, you're providing an improved product and superior standards. So that should hopefully differentiate that, and they'll need to join the club really if they wanted to play, but maybe not force it on people.
I agree with that. I
Yeah.
know in Western Australia with the Riawa over there, they have a similar thing where you basically you're accredited collector or supplier, and a lot of companies now will only use accredited suppliers. So you can choose whether or not you want to be accredited, but if you're not, you might not get work.
Alice,
Absolutely.
Sorry?
Who was that with in WA?
Riawa, the revegetation industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I forget what the rest of the things are. So I'm actually a member of it, even though I'm in SA, because I like to, keep abreast of what's happening Australia-wide. I've come from conservation background, government background, and now I'm in private. But yeah, I like to keep abreast of what's happening.
So we also are in the process where we have a seedsman's errors and emissions policy through our insurance company. Lloyd's of London was the very first one to bring one out many years ago. And through my seedsman's errors and emissions policy, they actually have a copy of the Australian Seed Federation Code of Practice, because you don't want your eucalypt seed just coming in a bag with blue gum on it. You know, it has to have the full botanical name, generally a provenance, a weight of what you're getting. Even a chaff to pure seed percentage would be good, but not optional. But if I have a case against me because, and it's happened in the past where a picker has sent me some eucalypt seed and it turned out to be a subspecies when it was growing. The nursery came back to me and said, the 10,000 mature plants we've got here now aren't what they say they are. So by having that code of practice in the background for my insurance company goes a long way for us recognising that, quality seed and people that are picking the seed for us are providing us with a quality product that's traceable, that has a lot number or batch number, so by date, germination, whatever you need, even a purity for WA. It goes a long way for us in reducing, the amount of money I'm spending with my insurance company.
Well, you should, as part of the quality control system of a supplier, you should be keeping a herbarium sample to make sure, firstly, that there's integrity, that what you said the product is that. If you send something off to like a laboratory in Queensland, I can't get them to identify a species. They won't tell me what species it is, but then they're going to arbitrarily tell me what's a good rate. Well, the variability between that genus is high. There's all these things when you get down to what actually the definition of something is. There's many points of what the definition is, and they're not all considered, and then it becomes sort of arbitrary rather than realistic, I feel. Yeah.
So, I mean, these are, it has to emerge over time. The other thing that we have heard is that there are, the flora banks are being updated. Osmond said, there is one in ASF that needs to be expanded and made more relevant over time. So that's a positive. Riawa's done a lot of work. There's obviously a lot to learn out of the forestry sector as well. So I think the opportunity of bringing this together now is actually very strong. And then the other thing, what we've also heard about today, and Richard highlighted it as well, which is, and what Peter's working on is coming up with some practical guidance for people around things like what does species translocation actually really mean when you practically do it on the ground. The idea is quite easy to understand, but there obviously needs to be a lot of practical guidance provided around that. There's also issues around, learning more and more how to break dormancy and get germination out of the more difficult varieties. So there's a research agenda there. So this is a fascinating area that really is going to be quite important into the future. So I want to get onto the governance piece. So we're going to put up the poll, and again, just put up these 5 questions. Slightly different this time, not asking for preference, just yes, no, or unsure around the 5 questions. So James, can we put up the questions, please? Okay, so for the first one, mostly yes, but a couple are unsure. Doing informed labelling, very strong here, 100%. As an alternative to licensing and reg, yeah, about 50%, but a lot of them no and unsure. Pretty well split on voluntary or formal compliance. And will it create more cost for small business? Again, you completely split on that one. Thank you very much. Right, let's get into the new agenda item, which is governance, and particularly the peak industry body. So as I said at the start, ownership of the industry, ownership of the strategy are really important issues. I hope you picked up my point there, Carmen, so rather than owner. So we've got a new section here, and as I said earlier on, is a sign of a maturing industry, of a developing industry, is one that has an industry body and can represent itself. Industries need to be able to represent themselves. This can be done by building off an existing option or creating something new. And one of the goals in the strategy will be that to have one, and preferably sooner rather than later. What I want to have a discussion with you about now is thinking about what roles can an industry seed body fulfill. So is it about advocacy? So this is about putting the best, the positions of the industry forward in the policy and the environment, helping draft policy. Is it the custodian of the standards? Does it become a training provider? Is it a networker? Does it provide linkages, connections, so a brokerage as such? Does it provide accreditation, potentially against a code of practice or a standard? Or does it play a role in the broader promotion of the sector overall? So these are all things that industry bodies do. And the question that I want to have a discussion with you is around here is, do you think we need an industry body for the sector? And what should it do? And then how would we achieve it? So those questions, we go back into the chat line so you can see them. And I'm very keen to get your thoughts about an industry body. Who would like to lead off?
I might jump in.
Go for it, Peter.
So I'd strongly support an industry guiding, an industry body overseeing a lot of this work, and I think there's a lot of good learnings from other industry bodies such as HIA and even from the forestry sector, FWPA, in terms of guiding a lot of the research priorities that are facing the sector, as well as they could also regulate and even implement any of the code of practices and through that provide teaching and upskilling. So yeah, I'd strongly support an industry body.
So the two examples that you gave there, Peter, they're actually what they're called industry service companies. So they're mandated by legislation. So they're not representative bodies, they are industry service organisations that spend compulsory levies. So it's just an important distinction, that's all. They're not
oh, sorry, JP.
Yeah, no, HIA and Forest Wood Products are they're research and development corporations by legislation.
Oh yeah, and certainly, as you mentioned, there's levies that members have to pay towards that, but that goes back into the sector through research and improvement practices. So I said again, been a win-win.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do other people think? Do we need an industry body for the native seed sector?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Why,
definitely.
Carmen?
Like I said, as someone who developed in the commercial industry, and everybody in the different sectors do their own thing independently, in contrast and often in conflict with, that could help stop all those potential issues and oversights and conflicts of interest. And as long as it's separate and independent from any one particular user, I'm in agreement, because these things are so easily conflict of interest and overrepresent one sector and not another. If it's an independent body that represents all parts of the industry, absolutely. I operate by myself. I really like not it to be that way.
Great. Ro?
Yeah, as a member of the ASF, the ASF was formed by members of the Australian seed sector, some horticulture, some agriculture and pasture. I'd just like to say that the support that the ASF has contributed to our business over the past, I don't know how long it's been going for, since the 80s, has been outstanding. They've stood with us at, state and federal levels. They've assisted our business moving forward with all aspects of the seed industry. We've been able to connect with like-minded people around the world. I'm also part of the International Seed Federation Tree and Shrub Seed Group, and I see how they work. And I just feel that the native seed sector really does need to be represented at some level, in some way, shape or form, because I've seen, like I said, how it worked for the other half of our business, being flowers and herb and vegetables. And it's really lacking in Australia. There are native seed, or the International Seed Federation, there's members from around the globe, and they are all part of their native seed sector within their own countries. And it's like Australia doesn't have that, and that has been a massive hole in the industry since I was a kid.
Forever, from conception. And there really isn't a conception. It's a whole bunch of people independently walking around. There is no native seed sector. There's no affiliation. They all push and pull against each other.
There's no representation. There's no communication. And I think, this industry, or the native seed sector, has a huge opportunity for growth. And we're missing the boat.
Well, demand totally outstrips supply.
So, what do you think, Matt Appleby?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would. I don't know enough about this ASF, Seed Federation. I'd be interested to see what the model is there. And as you sort of said, the HIA and forestry examples are I suspect, are quite different. So I mean, it could be I don't know if it's an expansion of their model or adopting a similar model, but I think that sounds like, sorry about the background noise. Sorry about that. I've got a dog that's got one of those horrible collars around his neck. Yeah, so I think that would be the way to have a look at that and examine the sort of structure that ASF has. Given what Rowena was saying then, it sounds very positive. So it's like a good template, perhaps look into.
So just as some additional information for you, if you wanted to go down a HIA, Forest Wood Products Association, Forest Wood Products line, then basically one of the criteria to get that system up and running is you need an industry representative body. So, so there's, they have what called an industry rep body, an industry services company, and to get an industry services company up, you need a rep body. So there's a chicken and egg thing going on there. What do you reckon, Alice Crombie?
So I've just been thinking, with seed collection licenses or permits, they are a state-based thing. And like I said, with the Western Australian side of things, because of their own regulations, they've come up with the RIAOA standards. And so, and it's a state-by-state thing. So I agree with the national body, but it's also a little bit harder to probably regulate, because, like I said, our permits and things are actually state-based. So I don't really know how you get around that. And whether everybody jumps on board with ASF or we create another one, I think that's up for discussion, obviously. I don't mind joining in an existing body when their framework's already there. Yeah, I certainly know, like in say the conservation sector, the Australian Seed Bank Network, I think that's what they're called now. You know, that's more of a conservation thing rather than a rehabilitation or a broader thing. But yeah, I think we all kind of need to merge into one, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah. So I'm very keen to get the perspectives of Peter and Tamika here, who certainly in the way it clicks over in my mind wouldn't necessarily be somebody who'd be a member of this organisation, but do you see that you might be a member of it, and what value would it generate nonetheless?
Yeah, I'd definitely be supportive of an industry body. I just think even coming back to the first agenda item with those 5 pillars and coming back to the information provision, it'd just be really good to have a central place to go for really consistent, reliable information for us.
Great, thanks. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, look, I agree with what people are saying. I think having a body is great because in the horticultural industry, for instance, they've got you know, groups that focus on that, and they collect levies and, you know, for training young people, in bringing people into the industry, and it's a good group to be in. And it's proactive and positive. And if you're out on your own, like some of the smaller collectors, I think it would be an advantage to be part of a group like that because it gives you more exposure to the industry. It gets your name out there. You have tours, you have meetings, you thrash out ideas. You know, it's a very positive avenue for an industry as such. And, you know, I think the ASF, while it's probably good, probably the main focus would be pasture, grains and vegetables and less focus on the native. If you are, I just think setting up your own body would be advantageous for a group like Native Seed. And you know, everyone joins. I think it would be positive and a good outcome.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. So any final comments before we do a poll on this that people would like to make?
Yeah, I'll just quickly pop in. A few years ago, I was looking into the different Australian bodies because I was trying to get accreditation for you know, the certain clients were asking, you know, what my accreditation was. And I found that there was also the Australian Seed Authority, and there was also the Australian, now I've forgotten what it stands for, it's like a seed testing association. But most of them were, like you say, the horticultural or grain based, you know, and same with the International Seed Testing Association. Most of it is not native seed based. So it is difficult to jump on board existing ones when their focus isn't native seed. You know, like I said, obviously the ASF has a branch for native seed, but yeah, I can also see the value in having a dedicated native seed authority as opposed to jumping in on board on something that's too diverse.
Thank you.
Sorry, just very quickly, I'll just add as well, there is the ANPC, so I think it's the Australian Native Plant, I can't remember what C stands for, but yeah, certainly merging ANPC with ASF could be like getting them together to nut something out might be a way forward.
Something that would be specific to us would be really good because of I'm not a producer, I'm a collector. And all the other things we're talking about, nearly all the other industries are all cultured and grown and controlled and the genetics are proven and bred, and we're doing something totally different, and it doesn't feel like any of the things are orientated towards the direction that I actually do on a practical basis. It needs to represent The body needs to represent the people using it and be true to form, true to type, represent the materials that it has. Not, yeah. I'd like to strap onto an existing body. It'd probably save us a whole bunch of cash and make logistics easier, but they actually need to represent what they're supposed to represent.
Yeah, so
Speed is such a broad term, and it's done in many different ways. And this is not agricultural and it's not bread. It really is different. Just sourcing something is a task unto itself.
Yeah.
Working out where to find an object, let alone how to collect from it and store it and the rest of it. It's a whole little section unto itself. It's made from all the other sections, but it's highly Pacific. It's a new niche. There you go. That's the word I'm looking at. It's highly niched and it's very Pacific.
Yeah. So these are all the considerations that go into thinking about what to do it. And also there are a number of existing players, and there needs to be a discussion and a debate and a coming together around this. So, and that will take time. But it's time to vote. So, James, can you put up the poll, please? So a couple of questions here. First question is just your views about whether we do something new or build off an existing. And then the second one is just about what the roles the body might undertake, which ones you'd prioritise. So picking your top three. Okay, so 50% saying new, 30 existing and 20 unsure. And in terms of what it might do, standards, number one, by clearly advocacy, and linked to standards is accreditation, and then the other ones fall away a bit inside of that. So thank you. All right, 3 more agenda items left, 15 minutes to go. Quick short discussion on this one. The ownership of the strategy itself. So while, as I said at the start, it needs to be a collective, it'll have people from government, it'll have people from the private sector involved, it'll have various representative organisations involved. But in terms of who would provide the secretariat behind it, so some enduring function, and that secretariat function in this emergent phase lies with Project Phoenix. But going to the future, do people have any thoughts about who that sort of secretariat, the person who keeps an eye on the strategy and just brings everybody together should be?
I thought that should be a function of itself. Self-improvement, looking within the internal organisation to improve one's practices and moving forward. Shouldn't it be a structure of itself?
I'm talking about the national strategy. So we'll go forth and write the national strategy, and it's a 10-year plan. So who is the secretariat for it for its first couple of years? It can change, but when it starts, when Project Phoenix ends, who picks up the can and brings all the partners together and says, yeah, let's have a meeting, see how we're going?
The body we were just referring to.
Yes, that's what I was about to say, the new body.
Yeah.
The peak industry body?
Yes.
So thumbs up if you think it should be the peak industry body. And I'll take, all right, well, that's pretty simple. Great, we've saved a bit of time, 2 minutes. Okay. James has got a couple of questions now, so that'll take about 5 or 10 minutes. So I'll pass over to James and then we'll do the wrap.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. You'll have to excuse me. I'm just sitting in the studio down here in Canberra, so forgive the background. So as JP mentioned, moving forward with Project Phoenix and the strategy, it will definitely be a collaborative effort. So we're keen to get an idea of how people like to be engaged with throughout the sector. So if anyone's happy to just unmute themselves or comment in the chat box, interested in knowing sort of what the communications and engagement opportunities are within your state or territory. It might be any key things like publications that we can collaborate with, events, strategic partnerships or anything like that. Feel free to, pop your hand up or type them in the chat, let me know. So I'll just pause for a few moments, let you have a think, and just unmute yourself and feel free to chat away.
Look, I can speak from an ASF perspective. So we have 5 regions all around Australia in that. So we have Western, WA, basically state-based, essentially, with the exception of Northern Territory. Those regions meet either in person or virtually twice a year to speak about both industry-wide issues and I guess regional specific issues that might arise as well. We also have an annual conference called Seed Business, which is a 2-day event held in August every year. And that brings our entire industry together, our entire membership base, where we discuss policy advocacy, bring in guest speakers. And we also have a range of sector specific working groups as well. For example, we have a horticulture working group, a science and technology working group, an education and training working group, market access and supply working group. So we cover sort of, I guess, different parts of the industry and our communication that way. Our day-to-day communication with members is through, MailChimp, electronic direct communication methods. And, we get around a 30 to 40% opening of those emails, which, when they're going out to, I guess, a mailing list around 450, 500, I'm generally happy with that. People open the stuff that they're interested in and delete the stuff they're not. So it's, as a general guideline, that seems to be the most effective way for our daily communication with our membership base.
Great, thanks, Osman. And so in terms of Seed Business, Osman, what's the Seed representation like at those events?
So we tend to get over 100 delegates most years. We didn't hold one last year because of COVID, but we're heading back to Brisbane this August. And it's a representation from across our membership base. So seed breeders, seed producers, seed packers, technology providers such as the biotechnology companies are quite well represented there as well. And it's a really diverse agenda too. Try and get into some speakers that will challenge our members as well and help them learn about different aspects of the seed industry. For example, at our last conference in Darwin, we got Sally Norton, who's the director of the Gene Bank in Horsham, the Grains Gene Bank, to, she spoke about the Svalbard seed vault in Norway and her experience taking Australian native seed to make deposits at the Svalbard vault. And that was really cool, seeing pictures from inside there and hearing Sally talk about that. So, we do like to get different speakers and different experiences for our members that they might not otherwise get to hear.
Right, excellent. Anyone else, ideas about comms and engagement opportunities for the sector?
Finding an industry body so I don't have to deal with the ACT government, because I will not. Okay?
Yeah.
How's that one?
Sounds good.
I deal with them. I sell seed to the ACT government all the time through another party. I will not contract to them. I let someone else be the face and I subcontract underneath.
Excellent. Well, hopefully these workshops are moving towards that for you, Carmen.
I pray.
Any other thoughts? Any key publications or partnerships or events that people think would be great to get Project Phoenix work out and about in the sector?
To an agricultural level, on an agricultural basis, you could, I don't know, maybe a Henty Field Day. Actually, the people who own a huge section of the land that we get native seed from, you might want to talk to them and engage them within it, because they're not actually involved within the industry. The industry depends upon them. You might want to spread it a little bit further to engage all stakeholders.
And so where would you start to look for those people, Carmen, if you were me? Is there a list that exists of people who hold the land for agriculture that is used for these services? Or
all the Department of Agriculture, feeding out from there, LLS, local land services, all these sort of things.
Yeah.
They're actually communicating with the people on the ground. Yeah, and they'll have something and tap onto something they're already organising. I went to an LLS native seed talk just a little while ago, trying to engage people on that level.
Great. Any other views or opportunities?
We have a large agricultural show in Tasmania, AgFest. We're manning a stand this year in relation to not so much native, but the work we do in revegetation of harvested coops, things like that. So there could be a good avenue for native, because a lot of farmers down here are fairly proactive for direct seeding and things like that. I don't know whether Greening Australia or NRM North are going to attend or to showcase what they do there. I'm not sure, but that could be an avenue. Well, for this state anyway.
Excellent. And any other views, feel free to put them in the chat, and they'll definitely be noted moving forward. What I might do now is just give everyone a few minutes to finish a short poll on communication. So this one's really about how you like to be communicated with, where the deficits lie in the sector, in your opinion, regarding the communication cycle. And that third question there is just about your current awareness of a subscriber list, basically, for Project Phoenix updates. So I'll give everyone a few moments to fill that out. So this is quite typical of what we normally find. So people are most interested in activity research status updates coming out of the project. The key issues tend to lie around a lack of awareness of issues. That's a bit dissimilar, actually. A lot of people tend to say there's also a large lack of awareness around existing solutions that just needs to be communicated better. And third and final, majority say they are not currently aware of the Phoenix network. So that's an online subscription list that lives on the Greening Australia website, just to stay up to date with the project. So feel free to check that out. But yes, potentially something to push a bit more would be creating awareness around that channel for people who do want to be kept up to date. So on that, I will pass back to JP to give a wrap up of the session. And yeah, any other comments around comms, feel free to put it in the chat. But apart from that, have a good afternoon. Back to you, JP.
Thanks a lot, James. So I've just got a slide summarising some of the key points that we've had in the discussion today. And we're finding that in these smaller groups, we can get into a bit more detail, which is really fantastic. So some of the things we talked about today were basically that all 5 pillars are important and interconnected. But a lot of the discussion we had was getting into the details around information provision and quality. And so they polled the most important. The key constraints are really dependent upon who you are. And the new one that really is there is that, I mean, there's access to land and labour and resources. Partnership was the highest voted, but also we talked about, you know, the timing and how critical that is, viability, policy issues, and also just some sort of brokerage portal function which joins the dots on a lot of different things. Then we talked about quality, so the importance of not reinventing the wheel. Rowena gave us a good example of that. It's also a form of insurance when things go wrong. And that, to start off with, it should be voluntary, and it's really about a guarantee of or a demonstration of quality, and also about preferred supplier status. Independent body, so yes, very important. There needs to be a process to go through to deciding who and how that should happen. The point was raised saying that one of the things that it does need to do is a lot of the advocacy action will happen at state level. So how does it work to that as well as a national level? The importance of networking, the importance of standards, and then ultimately the logical owner of the ownership of the strategy in terms of the coordination. Pick me up, there you go. I was just waiting for you to pick me up there, Carmen. But the ownership would lie on behalf of everybody and bring it together with the new peak industry body when it got up and running. So that's a quick potted summary of the workshop we had today. And we have 2 minutes left. So anybody, so in terms of where we go from here. So this is workshop 10. There's a national workshop tomorrow, which we anticipate about 12 people will come. I think at that stage we'll have maybe about 110 people who've attended, and I think we'll have had over about 300 people attend all of the workshops together, or maybe mid 200s. We're going to go away after this, and we're going to go and write a draft strategy, and we're going to work it through internally with the expert steering committee and within Project Phoenix. There will be some other workshops in the middle of May. If you want to come back and see where the design thinking has got to at that time, please come on board, because we'll be sharing some of our ideas then. But basically the aim is to then put out an exhibition draft, which there'll be more online workshops on about, and there'll also be a submission process around that. And then the strategy will be finalised, and it will be written and published probably in about August or September this year, as soon as practical is our intent. So that's it. It's bang on 12 o'clock. Thank you very much for your time. Stay around if you have any questions. Please feel free to send us any other feedback by email. It's been fantastic talking to you, and have a good day.